Hello, everyone. This is Whitney Wallace. I want to thank you all for being here today. And before we jump right into our session today, there are just a couple of reminders. First, this webinar is going to be recorded so that it can be shared online later. Also, if you would like to follow along with the slides, if you look in the handout section of the control panel on the right side of your screen, you will see that handout section. You can click on that and download a copy of all of the slides today, or if you need them to refer to later, they will be there. And then I can always email them to you as well. And then additionally today, I am joined by Cassie Longoria, who is another program specialist at TEA. And Cassie is going to provide technical assistance for the webinar. So if you have any questions or have any technology challenges, you can write to Cassie in the question box, which is also located in the control panel on the right side of your screen, and she will be able to help you. And then we'll have time for questions at the end if there's anything that Cassie isn't able to help you with. And obviously, I'll follow up afterwards as well. With all of that covered, let's go ahead and jump in. I'm really excited for this unit. We're going to be looking at learning environments, and I hope that it will be helpful. It's something that I'm very interested in and hope that you will be as well. So let's take a look at our agenda for today. We will begin by grounding ourselves in best practice, and then we will spend the majority of our time aligning centers today. Then before we end, we will take some time to tie everything we've discussed together, and then we will discuss next steps. So I also want to take a moment to discuss outcomes for our time today. So by the end of the session, you should be able to do 3 things or know 3 things. So first, you should be exposed to resources that describe best practice in creating a strong learning environment. You should also be able to facilitate the implementation of learning centers in kindergarten classrooms at a grade appropriate level. And finally, you should be able to increase alignment between pre-K and kindergarten in regards to learning environment. So we're going to go ahead and jump into grounding ourselves in best practice. So throughout our work together this year, we've regularly gone back to the NAEYC position statement to ground ourselves in best practice. And we're going to use that position statement for our unit today. So the position statement actually has quite a lot to say about learning environments because learning environments can include many aspects of a classroom and can impact classrooms in many ways. So first, the position statement notes that classroom environments for young children should be predictable and comprehensible from a child's point of view. It also states the physical environment should protect the health and safety of the students, which I think we would all agree with. And then finally, the point that we are probably going to focus most on today, NAEYC tells us that the learning environment should provide opportunities for students to play. And that's really where we're going to spend a bulk of our time focused on learning centers. But before we do that, we are going to take a look at TEA's Early Childhood Program self-assessment. Again, we've used this tool quite a lot over the course of our work together this year to ground ourselves in best practice. We're basically going to skim through most of the sections on learning environments, but I did just want to give you a brief glance. And of course, the whole thing is available on our group website if you would like to take a look or a more in-depth look. So 2 of the strands, first there's procedures and routines. They also emphasize the need for districts to support student behavior. Both of those things play into a classroom learning environment. Additionally, we can see that the self-assessment focuses on daily schedules, classroom displays, outdoor environment. Again, if you want more guidance on those things, the self-assessment is here, or I'm happy to talk through those things on our one-on-one calls. The self-assessment also focuses on links to classroom instruction. So as you can see, there are a lot of strands for learning environments. So for today, in order to not take up too much of your time, I've chosen to just focus on one strand for classroom environments, and that is the physical arrangement strand, which is on your screen now. And that emphasizes the need for at least 7 learning centers in each classroom. And this is actually the guidance for both pre-K and kindergarten classrooms, which could be surprising. I know that many kindergarten classrooms may not contain free choice centers, and some folks may be hesitant to include free choice learning centers in kindergarten classrooms. But I'm hoping that we can talk through today the importance of free choice centers in kindergarten classrooms and how to ensure that they are appropriate for kindergarten students. So we will go ahead and jump into discussing the alignment of learning centers. So as we discussed earlier, NAEYC promotes the idea that a learning environment should provide opportunities for play. And I love this quote that's on your screen. It just really emphasizes the importance of play. So it says, play is our brain's favorite way of learning. And that leads into the idea of brain development. So before jumping into the details of learning centers, I would like to ground ourselves in the science behind learning. So we know that young children learn best by making connections, which involves having many different experiences that are connected in some way. And that's why we encourage integrated curriculums and why we find them to be really helpful with students. Additionally, young children learn by repeated use, which integrates knowledge and skills from one activity to another and also builds upon previous experience. We also know that young children learn by learning from the more simple to the more complex, and that allows students to progress at their own rate and prepares students for future learning experiences. And then finally, young children learn when all areas of development are interconnected, which means that your motor skills and your visual skills, language skills, memory skills, emotional and behavioral control are all interwoven into a learning experience. And the great thing about knowing how young children learn is that we can cater our learning to meet their needs. And one way to provide an opportunity for students to learn in that way that we know is best for them and their brain development is through learning centers. So learning centers allow students to engage with learning at their own pace, and it allows them to connect many different skills and types of learning into one experience. So according to TEA's program self-assessment, each pre-K and kindergarten classroom should have at least 7 learning centers. And in these centers, there should be materials that are organized, that are easily available to students. We want students to be able to use the materials. They should be varied in difficulty of use so students can select the right materials for them. And we also want there to be enough materials for every member of the classroom so that if a child is interested in using something, it is available. The materials should also be relevant to current themes, units, or projects and should reflect the students' cultures and backgrounds so that they feel at home working in that center. Materials should also be labeled with pictures and home languages of students. Again, that helps them in being able to use the materials independently. And then when laying out centers, similar areas should be clustered together. So an example might be the library center and the writing center. You might put those close together because students might be using similar skills at both of those centers. Additionally, print and opportunities for writing should be available in each learning center to encourage literacy skills. And that's the same across the board for both pre-K and kindergarten. This is sort of best practice for learning centers. So on this slide, I've listed some common learning centers, and there are many more that classrooms may have, but this is sort of a basic list. So classrooms might have blocks, a library, and/or a listening center, a math center, dramatic play, writing, science, art, and sand and water. So I've actually chosen to dive into a few specific centers. And I've chosen the centers I have because I think that these are often the centers that are least likely to be seen in a kindergarten classroom, because often students engaged in these centers may look like they're playing while they're working, and so folks may be hesitant to allow kindergarten students to engage in them. But I think it's important to show how these centers can be grade appropriate for both pre-K and kindergarten. And so today we are going to start with blocks. So we'll start by looking at what students can potentially learn in centers. So in the block center, students can learn to represent the images they see in concrete ways because they're building things. They can practice math and science concepts such as height or size or balance. They can practice social skills as they work with their peers. They can enhance their problem-solving abilities as they work through challenges, both with their peers and then with the things that they're trying to make. They can gain vocabulary, and they can develop good working habits as they learn to make a plan, implement the plan, and evaluate the plan. So students have the opportunity to do all of these things just in one center. For each center, I will just be briefly touching on ideas for that center. So in the block center, there are lots of other things that you could include in these centers. So this is a very, very general overview. There are so many different ideas and opportunities to help students in these centers. But in the block center, you could include maps to encourage students to make cities. You could include graph paper for students to plan their creations. You could provide clipboards with writing tools to help them plan. It also encourages writing skills. They could be given blueprints or floor plans to help in their building. And then as we mentioned, it's always good to include books in each center. And so the block center could include books about construction workers or community or houses or farms. It would largely be dependent on what unit your classroom was working on. And you could try to find a book that could go in the block center tied to that theme. So for each center, we will also have this slide, which is sort of, can this center actually work in kindergarten? And how will I know that students are working on kindergarten level work? So for each center, I've provided one activity and I've tied it to kindergarten standards that align with that activity. And I didn't take a long time to do this. I sort of went through the kindergarten TEKS and thought of a center and then was able to say, oop, we could do that activity or we could do that activity, and it would tie to those standards. So it's not a difficult process to figure out ways to embed grade appropriate level work into centers, but I wanted to provide an example. So here I've provided an example of city building. So students can build a city and create signs and street labels using writing materials. You could also challenge students to use a specific number of blocks and to write down the number of blocks they used. And finally, you could encourage students to create maps of the cities that they have created. So while ultimately students should have the choice to do and create what they want in free choice centers, so you don't want to force them to do these activities, if you provide them with the right activities and if you model activities for them, you can encourage them to engage in activities that are aligned with more academic standards. As you see on the screen, I've covered an ELAR standard, I've covered 2 math standards, and a social studies standard. So it doesn't just have to be more social emotional skills, you can really hit on content if you plan intentionally with your centers. For each center, I've also included a potential issue or sort of a warning, just in case folks are not as familiar with some of the centers. So for the block center, things to consider are that it needs a very large space. And as you can imagine, or as you have probably experienced, it can be a very active and noisy center. And storage is very important to ensure that materials are easily accessible to students. So those are just some things to keep in mind if you were to start trying to implement some learning centers in a kindergarten classroom. So next we are going to take a look at dramatic play, which is always fun. So students can learn a lot from the Dramatic Play Center. They can practice their representational skills. They can act out or interpret something they have seen. They can engage in problem solving. They can develop social skills, act out a role, pretend. It helps to increase their vocabulary. So the options with dramatic play are limitless, as you can turn the dramatic play area into so many different things. However, a few examples that I've listed here, this would be more in line if it is a kitchen at the moment, would be shopping ads, to-do list, clipboards with writing tools, cookbooks, recipes, and then books can basically align to whatever your dramatic play is at the time. So for example, if the dramatic play area is a bakery, the books would be about bakeries. And if the dramatic play area is turned into a fall farm, the books could all be about farms and farmers. So you would want to put books into the center that have to do with whatever you've turned your dramatic play area into, which can then encourage students in their pretend play. So can this work for kindergarten? And I would say absolutely. So I've provided an example here of a bakery. So once again, I just looked at the kindergarten TEKS and then I quickly created some ideas for the dramatic play center. I would heavily model these specific activities for students when introducing the center to encourage them to engage in these activities. So the first one I have is to encourage students to write recipes to follow. So recipes can be written in the center, or students could write those recipes outside of the center, and the teacher could turn them into a book that could then be in the center. Students would be really engaged in pulling that off and trying to read and follow the recipes. You could also cut out or print different kinds of cookies, and you could have students sort those cookies into 2 or 3 different categories. That could be based on size or color or whatever skill you're working on in the classroom. And students could even complete a bar graph to display in the bakery to indicate how many cookies are left of each kind that they have to sell to their peers. So you're hitting on 2 math teaks there. You could also encourage students to act as cashiers at the bakery, and that covers 2 social studies standards. So as you can see, while it may look like students are just playing and pretending to be in a bakery, if they are engaged in these activities, they are working on grade level appropriate standards and skills. So a few notes about the Dramatic Play Center. It needs a large area, just like the Block Center, and like the Block Center, it can be very active and noisy, but that means that students are invested and engaged, which I would say is a great thing. Storage is also very important, as there could potentially be many things to store, especially if you're switching out your dramatic play, which is the next item. It is very important to change things within this center to retain students' interest. If you've been in a pre-K or kindergarten classroom with dramatic play, you'll see that after a certain period of time, students are less interested in the things in that center, and so it needs to be changed regularly to keep them invested. So we are going to touch on the Art Center. The Art Center, I didn't switch the slide, there we go. The Art Center will allow students to practice their representational skills, express what they know, explore and respond to artistic elements. They'll be able to use specific tools used in art. They'll be able to develop and use their fine motor skills. They'll be able to practice hand-eye coordination and act like an artist and create. So again, some of those things, specifically when I read develop and use fine motor skills, are directly correlated to students' abilities to write. And so being able to provide opportunities for students to practice those things can help in maybe more traditionally academic areas. So ideas for the Art Center, and again, I think the options here are limitless, and students are always invested in having new and interesting and unique items, but just sort of an overview, you can do a variety of writing utensils, which can range anywhere from normal markers and pens or paint all the way to, I did potato stamps with my students when I taught, so that can look like a lot of things. You can provide examples of fine art. You can provide books about artists or art magazines, and you can provide theme-related books using real pictures to spur students' creativity and maybe inspire them to create something new. So can an art center work in kindergarten? And I'm sure by this point you know that I would say the answer is yes. So obviously you can incorporate all of the art teaks at the kindergarten level into an art center, but teachers could also do other things to tie in other subject standards. So you could place recently read books in the art center and encourage students to identify and describe the main characters through drawing and writing, and again provide them an opportunity to use lots of different tools in completing that project. Or teachers could place the US and Texas flags in the art center along with materials for students to recreate them on their own. So things to be aware of with the Art Center, as you can imagine, it tends to be messy and ideally would be close to water. You may need an area for works in progress and or a drawing area. Storage is very important. Again, lots and lots of materials. Best practice would indicate that you should put the center over a tile or vinyl flooring to make it easier to clean up. And then available materials should be rotated to be theme related and to retain students' interest. So I'm sure you're seeing that theme throughout all of them, is that ideally you're putting new materials into centers so that students are invested in going to centers. And then our last center for today, I wish we had time for them all, we'll take a look at one of my favorites, which is the sand and water table. So what do students learn in the sand and water table? And the answer is a lot. So they can engage in pretend play, they're using their sense of touch, they're demonstrating math concepts with mass or measurement, They're learning to share space and materials with others. They're using science concepts, motion, temperature, liquid, solid, whatever, depending on what you have in there, depends on what kind of science skills they're using. They're learning to use a variety of tools. They're expressing their wants and needs and learning how to talk with others in an appropriate way. They're practicing hand-eye coordination, and they're developing problem-solving skills. So again, these are some basic ideas for the sand and water table. You could use alphabet letters or numbers, and then students could use magnetic wands to find all of the letters in the alphabet. You can still have books in the Sand and Water Center or near them. I wouldn't suggest putting them in the table, but theme-related books that have water or sand associated with them would be great for this station. And then alternative materials that encourage writing. So you could put shaving cream in the table, anything that students could be invested in practicing their writing skills. So can this work in kindergarten? And again, I would say absolutely. So this is a great center for both science and reading. And so the example I've given here is working with magnetic and non-magnetic objects. So students could use magnetic sticks and be asked to predict if items are magnetic or not. And then you could give them a form to fill out where they can plan their investigation, collect data, so mark if an item, so they can make a prediction if an item would be magnetic or not. They can collect data, and they can organize the data on that form after they've completed their investigation. And then for reading, students could use magnetic letters to build sight words or spelling words. So they'd be able to, use a magnetic wand, or I had students use magnetic fishing poles, and I would cut out fish and tape a paper clip to them, and students could go fishing for sight words or for letters, depending on their ability. They were always very invested in that process. And they're also getting to practice their skill of identifying letters or sight words. So things to note with the Sand and Water Center. So it tends to be messy and need a lot of room. So I would suggest that it's close to water, just in case there needs to be some cleanup. And more teacher support may be needed just because of the materials that are in this station. It's also important to know that it's a very popular center. I don't blame the kids. It's very, very fun, but you do need to have some kind of system in place to ensure that there are an appropriate number of kids in that center. And then best practice would indicate that you should put this center over tile or vinyl flooring. Again, I think that makes for easier cleanup. And then you do need to keep cleanup in mind. So just have a plan for what you hope to do. So those are all the centers that we're going to cover today, but I hope that was helpful in just seeing how fairly easily you can make centers that may not traditionally be found in kindergarten classrooms. You can make them appropriate for a kindergarten classroom. And so before we move on to wrap things up, I do want to bring us back to tie everything together using our theory of change. So implementing free choice learning centers lies in the implementation bucket. But in order to make free choice centers work and be implemented in kindergarten classrooms, we need the support of administrators. And those administrators are going to be making decisions based on developmentally appropriate practice, because based on what NAEYC says and TEA's program self-assessment, having free choice learning centers in the kindergarten classroom and providing opportunities to learn through play is in fact tied to developmentally appropriate practice. So by building knowledge base in our administrators are then able to support their teachers in being able to implement centers in their room. So to summarize our time together, you should now know where to go to find information and guidance on best practice in regards to learning environments. You should be able to facilitate the implementation of learning centers in kindergarten classrooms at a grade appropriate level. And you should be able to increase alignment between pre-K and kindergarten in regards to learning environment by ensuring both grade levels have free choice centers. And in preparation for our next PLC, I would like for you to think through the 2 questions on your screen. So the first is, how will you align learning centers in pre-K and kindergarten? And then what barriers might you face in implementing 7 learning centers in kindergarten? And I hope we can have a really transparent and helpful discussion surrounding those questions. So in regards to next steps, we will have our PLC meeting on Wednesday, April 10th at 2 p.m. We will discuss learning environments and specifically learning centers and how you can increase the alignment of learning centers in pre-K and kindergarten. And I hope that you'll come ready to discuss what learning centers currently look like at both grade levels in your district. And I'm also hoping, I'm really excited for this, that we will be able to enjoy a short presentation at a PLC, at our PLC, excuse me, by a member of our cohort who has done some work this year on beginning to incorporate free choice learning centers into kindergarten classrooms. So she's going to come and be able to talk us through how she's gone about taking some of those steps, how teachers have reacted to that change, how administrators have responded to that change, and I hope it will be a really great time and really helpful discussion. So finally, we will have our one-on-one calls that are set at your scheduled times, and I will look forward to talking with each of you. And that wraps up what we have for today. I want to thank you all for coming. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them into the question box. I'm happy to read them out, but I'll stick around for a few more minutes to answer any questions that come in. But otherwise, I want to thank you for being here, and I look forward to our one-on-one calls over the next few weeks. Thank you so much.